Thank you for tuning in to Looking Down the Road, where we analyze the intersection of law enforcement and road safety. Last April, I had Schenectady District Attorney Robert Carney come in to do an interview, and he spoke about drunk driving from the District Attorney's office from an administrative point. Today's guest will give us a more hands-on perspective. And here we have Mary Tanner-Richter with us. She's a graduate of Nazareth College, where she has earned a degree in political science. After that, she went on to Albany Law School, and after she passed her bar exam, she worked with Jackal, Fleischman, and Lundgren, a Buffalo law firm. And after that, she joined the Albany County District Attorney's Office as an ADA in 2001. Since then, she's was instrumental in starting the Vehicular Crimes Unit, which she now runs. She's also won numerous awards for her work in fighting drunk driving. And I guess, Mary, where I'll start with is that in my dealing with victims and drunk driving, I find that people who become active in it had some experience with a family member being killed or injured by a drunk driver. What was your inspiration for pursuing a career in law enforcement?
Well, fortunately, I have not had that personally happen to me. However, what gave me the interest in law enforcement and getting into prosecution was an internship in college that I had out in Rochester, and it was watching prosecutors doing the right thing for the right reason, that it wasn't about the big paycheck at the end of the day, which certainly doesn't come with the job. And that it truly seemed to be very rewarding. And then when I had the opportunity to come to the Albany County DA's office, I had no intention of doing vehicular crimes until I was eventually moved over, and then it was meeting my first victim. And at that moment, I can't imagine myself doing anything else at the DA's office. And
you say you had an internship through Nazareth College. Was that like under the guise of political science, or what was the connection?
Yep, I was a political science major, and I actually had always wanted to get into politics. And I did an internship earlier in my time in college at the state senate. And although it was a great experience for me, it also woke me up to the idea that it is not what I wanted to do. It was very different than what I had anticipated. And then the question for my advisor is, now what? Because I didn't know. And she said, try this internship at the Monroe County DA's office. And I went there, and it was meant to be.
Oh, well, it sounded like your advisor earned her salary that year.
She absolutely did.
Okay. Now, when I had Mr. Carney in here, he gave, you know, we forget how pervasive and accepted drunk driving was just back in the 70s and 80s. And this really rang home to me when I was reminded of this when Mr. Carney cited some statistics. He said that in that period of the 70s, the average BAC for someone arrested was 0.19, and half of those cases were dismissed. So I guess I'll lead in with this question: is since you've come to Albany, how has law enforcement evolved on the issue of drunken driving?
Well, I think that thankfully that's no longer the case for most areas. That I think is being looked at as what it is, that it is scary and it is a crime, and where you're talking about numbers like that, these are dangerous individuals that can kill anybody at any time. So I think that that's no longer acceptable. And what I have seen in my time is that a lot of DA's office, including our own, have created policies that once your blood alcohol level is starting to get up, you know, to what we consider to be incredibly dangerous, that there are policies that don't let reductions.
Aggravated
certainly.
Level, right?
Well, sure. I mean, for Albany, it's 0.15 or refusal. So, you know, we chose that number, and anything about that, you're not going to get a reduction. And we certainly are not dismissing cases unless there is a serious problem with the case that it needs to be dismissed, and that's rare.
Okay, and by the same token, how have you seen that juries have evolved, because, you know, maybe back at the time when I was referring to, people said, well, gee, that could have been me. And, you know, have the juries evolved as well in from what you've experienced?
You know, I wish we would have had a little more evolution there. Unfortunately, I think we still oftentimes get juries that think that could be me. I think a lot of juries, when they hear a defendant saying that they had 2 beers, 2 drinks, that they're thinking that was them. What they're not understanding is it really wasn't 2 drinks. It was quite a bit more, but that's what they're saying. So although I think some juries have become less tolerant to these cases, we still have quite a few that are thinking, there but for the grace of God go I. Or there's also, we just had a case recently where, you know, it was, well, we think the, you know, offender learned their lesson by going through the process itself, and we don't want to saddle them with a conviction at the end of the day. So, and that to me is scary, that that is still a mindset that's out there. I think it's less of those individuals, but there are, you know, there's still work to be done.
Do you find it necessary to bring in a toxicology expert to talk about how many drinks this defendant would have had to have taken to get to this BAC level? Because I know there was a trial down in New York City that was where a prominent woman's daughter was killed, and the defense attorney said, this is just beer. It's just beer, you know. This is nothing, you know. And the judge wouldn't allow an expert to come in to say, you know, just how much beer that was, and how the alcohol, how alcohol relates to beer, to wine, and that wasn't allowed for some reason. He was convicted anyway, but is that sometimes helpful in a case you're trying?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you can't bring a toxicologist in every time. I mean, there aren't enough of them. There isn't enough, you know, funding for it. There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't. But certainly on the more high-profile case or the more serious offenses, we'll bring in a toxicologist, and that's exactly what we want them to do. We want them to explain not only how alcohol works on, you know, an individual, both physically and, you know, mentally, but also when they say they had those 2 drinks, and when you see what their number actually is, how many that is. And I think that is an eye-opener to our juries, and absolutely I'm going to have a toxicologist do that when I can.
Okay, great. And I think the case was the O'Hearn case, where one woman was killed by another woman who was drunk.
I am familiar with that.
Okay. I think that, I could be mistaken, but I think the lawyer for her came out and spoke to the media, and he said, look, we are to blame for this, for why our victims can't get closure. We tell our clients not to admit to any guilt because there is a legal process that we have to follow. Mm-hmm. Is that something that, I mean, you speak with a lot of victims, is that something that they can process, or does it lessen the anger they may feel, and that they can't get the defendant to say I'm sorry, or to take responsibility?
You know, that is a hard one, because that is oftentimes what they're looking for, is just that apology, that recognition that the offender is the one that did this, and that now we have a family that's reeling with the loss of a loved one that they had not ever expected having to deal with. And that's that's part of the conversation that we have with our victims, saying, look, you're looking for that, and they have an attorney who, exactly what you said, that's telling them, don't have contact, this isn't the time, we have to let the criminal side of it run its course, and then after that, you know, if you know, even as part of the sentence, a defendant has an opportunity to speak, and oftentimes they'll apologize. But the other part of it too is, I tell my families, I don't know the offender. So whether they truly are sorry for it, or they're sorry for the situation that they currently find themselves in, I don't know which it is. Maybe it's both, maybe it's not. So, you know, I think it's one of those things that they have to be cautious with, whether or not it's a genuine apology as well.
Okay, and I know we discussed earlier about one of the cases I wanted to discuss with you was Tyler Pescuzzi. It's currently under appeal, so there may be some areas that you can't delve into, and I'm sure our audience would fully understand that. But it was a very tough case, given the circumstances of who was driving, and not only that, but the accident reconstruction. I believe there were 2 investigations into that, which took a long time. I can recall calling your office, trying to bother you as to what was taking so long, and you know, I didn't really understand myself the degree of all the. When you have 2 investigations, it really lengthens the whole process. So on top of all that, you had to go up against a very formidable defense team, and one of who was your former colleague in Michael Mcdermott. How did you feel about going up against someone who you had worked with before?
Michael is an absolutely fantastic trial attorney. We knew that it wasn't going to be easy no matter who was on the other side. But certainly, you know, having him on the other side keeps you on your toes, but you know, he and Steve Coffey, they're class guys. They did, you know, the job that they had to do, and we focused on the job that we had to do. And it really can't matter who's on the other side. We know we've got to put in the best case that we can.
But did you feel that he might have more insight to you as to what your strategy might give him an advantage that if it was somebody who didn't know you at all wouldn't have?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What Mike would know about me, having worked with me, is that I'm going to dig into everything and anything. So I don't know how much of an advantage that gives him. And quite frankly, I think if you asked around even just a little bit, anyone's going to find that out. So I don't think he had too much of an advantage as it relates to that. He knew we were going to be putting the best case in that we possibly could.
Well, without going too much into the
Thank
evidence, I thought you and Michael did a fabulous job with rebutting the claim that the other person's DNA was on the fob, and that you showed, you know, beyond that why that wasn't the case with the accident reconstruction people that you brought together. So I got the sense that here's someone who has a lot of experience in knowing what questions to ask someone who sits there as an accident reconstructionist, and I mean, it was sort of disappointing to see his mother coming out there to not accept any responsibility, and he seemed to take the same tack with that. But that was I wasn't confident that they would convict him. Were you confident that would be the outcome?
What I was confident who our driver was from the very beginning, obviously it played out well. You never know at the end of the day what a jury's going to do. There's always the gamble when you take a case to trial, but I felt very confident in the facts that we had, the work that was done in that case. Anytime you have a case like this, it's important to have a good collision reconstructionist, and I'll say some of the best are with the New York State Police.
Mm-hmm. And let's shift over to the issue of opioids and prescription drugs. Talk about how, when did you first see your case of a case involving opioids or prescription drugs?
The first prescription drug crash homicide I had was out in Bethlehem, and I want to say that was about 11 years ago, and that was new to us at the time. You know, case of first impression, and it is a whole different world when you're talking about prescription drugs than when you're talking about heroin or cocaine or illicit drugs. Because
they have in most cases, they have a legal right to, or a prescription from a doctor.
Right, and that becomes the new thing that we have to start educating our public about. You know, I think by now people know that drinking and driving is bad. Whether at the end of the day they're doing it themselves or there's a stigma that is now finally attached to that. I think that we can safely say that The same is not true for driving under the influence of prescription drugs. That's the new message that has to get out there, as well as marijuana. We know that's coming our way. It's all around us with the Canada now legalizing it. It's everywhere. It's coming to us. And that's the message that needs to be getting out now too, that those substances are impairing, whether you think it is or not. If you feel different, you drive different. And the fact that if you have a prescription, that doesn't mean you have the right to get behind the wheel. You may not. And if you hurt somebody or kill them, whether it's prescription or not, you're going to be dealing with the same, we're going to prosecute you the same way.
Okay, and you're probably familiar with the Hudson safety tree that they have every spring?
I am not.
Oh, well, they have, my mother started the safety tree in Schenectady, and Hudson did a similar event each spring where they acknowledge people. First it was drunk driver, but then they had to include prescription drugs and opioids. And they said for the last 2 years, the victims they've honored the opioid has exceeded the drunk driving. So is that what you've seen in your a steady increase in the opioid cases that you handle?
We are seeing that statewide. Actually, the DWIs are down slightly, which is a beautiful thing to see. However, the drug driving cases are up. We are seeing more of those. And again, I don't see that slowing down anytime soon, unfortunately.
And in the area of driverless cars, how do you, I know we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but how do you see that impacting the role that you play as the vehicular crimes unit head?
Well, it's very interesting to see what's coming down the pike, or what is anticipated to be coming down the pike. I've got a lot of questions as to how that all works. And there will be issues as to if there's a fatal crash and if there's impairment, who's our operator? How am I proving operation? Because, the way the law is now is you're behind the wheel, keys in the ignition, engine running. But if you're not, the one that's in control, who is? So I think that what I'll be interested to see is when we get to that point, what the law is, because the law is going to have to be updated in order to take into account this massive change in technology.
Are you familiar with Trooper McConnell, who is over analyzing this for the state police?
I'm not familiar with him personally. I have spoken with members of the New York State Police in relation to driverless cars, though. Because
he says this is the game changer. He says, unfortunately, all that we're doing in terms of education and law enforcement is not really changing the numbers. He says he was very confident that this is the silver bullet, as he put it, that will address this. And I think that also he was saying this under the premise of that the two things, that the driver doesn't need to be licensed and the driver doesn't need to be sober. I think that was what they were putting forth with that. But I got to say that his confidence was kind of inspiring. You kind of want to believe him that he's. I guess you take a little more time to mull it over.
I do, because although I can understand where he's coming from, and certainly if it's not a drunk who's actually moving the car, then we're in a better situation. However, I guess in the position that I am, I'm always looking for, the exception to the rule, and how, what the negatives could be, and what are we looking for, because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what we get. It's the people that, are drunk that crash, or under the influence of drugs then crash or get arrested. Because just as much as I do, someone drives intoxicated 80 times and, before they're ever picked up for a DWI. So I have concerns about what if you have to have the driver all of a sudden go to manual? What if something comes out that the car is not seeing? Who's going to be responsible for that? So there are a lot of questions that I would want answered before I can fully jump in on that. But the idea of not having the drunk behind the wheel while it's moving, that is a great thing, and I think that that's something to be looked at. What I would be even more interested in, at least in the meantime, is to have every car have an interlock, automatic, automatic, because now you're gonna force people to not be able to get behind the wheel.
Well, they could get around that too by having someone else.
But it's harder.
It's harder.
I mean, and that's kind of where we're at. You know, you make it more and more and more difficult for these people to drive impaired.
And another statistic that Trooper McConnell cited was 94% of all crashes are due to human error. So he's saying that this addresses that specifically. It's not addressing the 6%, but the 94% where human error or human deficiency is involved. So that's where he was, and I guess you know, though maybe the next we'll have more information at the next symposium to digest that. And and also in lowering the risk for people on the road, what do you think of the presence of Uber and Lyft? Have they made an impact in what you're seeing?
I think it's almost too soon to tell, because it's still relatively new that it's been in our area. Anecdotally, I think it's helped. I mean, our numbers are down. I don't think the numbers are down completely because of Lyft and Uber. I think that there are a lot of different factors that come into play. But I do think that it certainly has been helpful. I know I hear it quite often, going to get an Uber, going to get a Lyft, and I think it's great. The little cautionary tale, however, is we've also prosecuted Uber drivers and Lyft drivers who were under the influence while they were driving.
Do they have a more severe penalty for endangering a passenger who?
Well, so far,
or is there any? I mean, in terms of the law, does it make any difference? I mean, I think there should be a greater punishment if you're going to go out there and advertise yourself as a public safe way to transport somebody, and then you're drunk yourself. That's double jeopardy. I mean, you're endangering the passenger and the driver and the other people.
Well, and that becomes the question of whether or not they're considered the equivalent of a taxi driver, because the law does say for taxi drivers, if you have a fare with you at the time that you're stopped and you're under the influence, then that does elevate it. As for Uber or Lyft, I don't think we've crossed that bridge yet. I am not aware of anyone who has tried it, and thankfully the couple that we've had so far in Albany County, they did not have passengers at the time they were stopped. Thankfully those people had gotten to their destinations relatively safely, I guess. But that's going to be something to be seen, and certainly if that's possible, we'll be looking at those type of charges.
One of the things that RID has been working on since 2013 is a bill that Assemblyman Ortiz put out, which would lower the BAC to 0.05. I think that Uber and Lyft could play a key role in this, but what's frustrating from our end, which is trying to pass the laws, is that the legislators are acting as though Uber and Lyft are irrelevant, or they don't play into the equation at all. You need to have more than just the carrot. You need a stick to combine that with it. And in Utah, they're seeing that the numbers of drunk driving arrests and crashes have gone down, and the law hasn't even gone into effect. But do you think that a 0.05 BAC would further the trend of lowering the rates?
Well, I'm a big fan of it. I mean, we all know everyone's impaired at an 0.8, but quite frankly, most people would be impaired at an 0.5. I mean, that's still a significant number. So, you know, anything that helps reduce the carnage on the roadway, I'm all for, and lowering a BAC certainly, I think, helps that.
Yes, it's unfortunate that you know, when my mother Doris was doing this, she would just have face-to-faces with people, and she established a rapport. And with the internet and text messaging and emails, that's hard to do. And I think that the thing that made her so effective, and I don't think she would be as effective today, because there's also the senators and assemblymen have insulated themselves with a layer of aides that you deal with, and you don't actually get to speak with them directly. And I don't think that it's hard to get a read because you're dealing with an aide and not, you know, going directly to the person who you're trying to influence. And then whatever I say is filtered through them, through someone else. And so it is pretty frustrating, but I think this is going to be something we're going to push for in the next session coming up. Now, one thing that I will say is that I think the biggest mistake that NHTSA ever made was abandoning the Friends Don't Let Friends Drive drunk campaign, because maybe they're not aware of this, but that campaign recruited millions of people to take an active measure in preventing drunk driving. I think what I've heard from some people who worked there at the time, there was pressure to come up with something new for the Generation X that they could relate to, so they came up with buzz driving. I think that doesn't require any action. It's just very ineffective, and the statistics show that there was a huge increase after Friends Don't Let Friends was abandoned. And for some reason, it's like, you know, when Coca-Cola changed its recipe to the new Coke, and everyone hated it, they were smart and went back to the original.
Right.
So I'm hoping, but the NHTSA, the administrators don't seem to feel that way.
That I can't weigh in on, because I don't have any interaction with NHTSA. So I will say I'm well aware of the Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk. I mean, that was, you know, that's been there forever. And I think that anytime you can marry new with old is not a bad idea, you know, and to get multiple messages out, I think works, you know, because it might be that the buzz driving, that will hit certain pockets of the population, but the Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk may hit a different pocket. And
well, I think I see it as one is encouraging you to take an action. You know, don't let your friend drive drunk, and I think that was a genius strategy, and it worked. And I could see them wanting to try something new, but when you saw the numbers increase like they have, and they haven't gone down to that level, I believe, since I think they stopped it in 1999, so it's been some time to analyze all the data on it. It's hard to see that they you know don't want to they want to remain relevant, and somehow they think that going back to an old slogan, even though it was effective, is not something they're interested in. So looking ahead, are you very optimistic about how you see your job in keeping the roads safer? Do you feel better than as you go forward?
I think you always want to be optimistic. I mean, because if you're not, it makes doing this job almost impossible. Some days are better than others. Some days I can be more optimistic than others. I think that society today gets wrapped up in so many other things, and you know, this sometimes gets pushed to the back, and you know, and doesn't get the attention that it needs. But then, you know, you go to symposiums like we were just at recently, and you see that there is this group of people who truly care about getting the message out and preventing another death on our highways, and that that gives me hope that, you know, that there are people that are willing to champion this. Like you know, you're continuing what your mother did for years and years and years, and you know, the fact that this continues on, it does give me hope. And you know, the greatest thing would be to be put out of a job. That would be a great thing.
Well, then maybe start another chapter.
Sure, I would be more than
life.
happy to do that.
Okay, and you think that the driverless cars might be a component of that?
I absolutely do. I mean, and that's, I don't want you to get me wrong in that I think that they're a horrible idea. I think there's a lot more that's going to have to come into play before we get to that point. And even just the turnover. I mean, you know, the car I'm driving, I think, is 11 years old right now. So by the time that gets filtered down to everyone, or the lion's share of the population having them, I think it's a long way out. But yeah, I absolutely think that will come a long way to, you know, lowering, if not eliminating, the deaths on the roadway.
Well, I hope you're proven to be right, and I thank you for coming in amidst your busy schedule. This is Mary Tanner-Richter of the Albany District Attorney's Office, who also heads the Vehicular Crimes Unit. If you missed the beginning of the show, you can go to our website at www.rid-usa.org, or if you want to recommend this show to a friend, you can refer them to the links that are available at that website. So until next time, we'll be looking down the road. Thank you.